Thank you, Dallas. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the October 27, 2021 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. First item on our agenda is roll call.
Chairman Shernick.
Here.
Commissioner Flagg.
Here.
Commissioner Height.
Present.
Commissioner Lukacs.
Here.
Commissioner Honoran. Commissioner Poland.
Here.
Commissioner Teta.
Here.
Chairman, you have a quorum.
Great. Thank you, Jane. Okay. Anyone wishing to speak tonight during the public invited to be heard, which is items 4 and 8, or during any public hearing items, which is agenda item 6A tonight, will need to watch the live stream of the meeting for instructions about how to call in to provide public comment at the appropriate times. Instructions will be given during the meeting and displayed on the screen when it is time to call in to provide comments. Comments are limited to 5 minutes per person, and each speaker will be asked to state their name and address for the record prior to proceeding with their comments. Please remember to mute the live stream when you are called upon to speak. Next on the agenda is communications from Planning Director Glenn Van Nimwegen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Planning Commissioners. Welcome this evening. We had intended to have your electronic participation policy for you, but as you know, we're a little bit down on staff in our city's attorney's office. So as soon as we're ready, we will put that back on the agenda, and we appreciate all the work that's gone into it to this point. But that's all I have to communicate this evening.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate that. While we're talking about city attorneys, everybody should notice that we do not have an attorney present tonight from the city. Glenn gave me notice of that in advance. If we run into an issue that absolutely needs legal counsel from the city's attorney, our only option would be to table the meeting until a date certain in the future. But hopefully we won't run into something like that. Okay. All right. Next on the agenda is public comment. This is for anything that's not on the agenda tonight, because we have a public hearing section for that item. So public comment, anybody who wants to say anything you want to the commission. Dallas, if we could put the instructions up on the screen, and then I'll read through this. Thank you. So the information is being displayed on the screen for those viewing from home. Please dial 1-888-788-0099. When prompted, enter the meeting ID 871-6287-3678. When we're ready to hear public comment, we will call on you to speak based on the last 3 digits of your phone number. Each speaker must state their name and address for the record and will be allowed 5 minutes to speak. Please remember to mute the live stream when you are called upon to speak. To do this, all the technicalities behind the scenes, we need 5 minutes. We'll take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 7:10.
Chair, I'm going to unmute. I'm going to drop this slide, and we're going to wait for the stream to catch up.
Great. Thank you, Dallas.
All right, Chair, I see we have one caller.
Yeah. So Dallas, if you want to get them into the meeting, it's caller whose number ends in 949.
Caller 949, are you there?
Hi, I'm here. Hi, my name is Ruby Bowman. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ruby Bowman, 1512 Left Hand Drive. At the August Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, I asked the Commission for a copy of Planning and Zoning's Conflicts of Interest Policy. Deputy City Attorney Teresa Tate responded to my comments and said the policy was contained in the City Municipal Code. To obtain a copy, Tate said I would have to do an open records request, or CORA. I submitted requests to the City Clerk's office and received responses to my CORAs from the records manager. She informed me that the Longmont Municipal Code does not contain specific policy concerning conflicts of interest for the Planning and Zoning Commission, nor is there a general policy for boards and commissions. At the August meeting, Ms. Teresa Tate spoke in elaborate detail about what was contained in the city's conflicts of interest policy. She explained that only Commissioner Honoron can determine whether he had a conflict regarding the Rivertown annexation, even though the Rivertown developer was a client of his and Honoron voted to recommend approval of the annexation. Ms. Tate also talked about disclosure of conflicts. I now know the truth about there being no conflicts of interest policy in the city code. I would like the commissioners to tell me which city document did Ms. Tate use to base her legal opinion regarding the policy? What was the basis of her statement when she told you that only Commissioner Honoron and no one else can determine whether he has a conflict of interest on the matter before the commission? This statement doesn't make sense to me. If this is the case, it opens the possibility of corruption on the commission. The city clerk's office provided me with a copy of P&Z's bylaws. There's only one sentence in the bylaws pertaining to conflicts. Did Teresa Tate extrapolate all the details of her explanation to the commissioners regarding the policy from that one sentence? I don't think so. Please direct staff to provide me with a copy of the city's conflicts of interest policy as explained in detail by Ms. Tate at the August meeting. Not send me on another wild goose chase by requiring me to do another CORA request. The city attorney's staff should be more cooperative and not so secretive about the policy. When I requested a copy of Boulder's conflicts of interest policy from the Boulder City Planning Department, the development review manager readily provided a link to the policy in Boulder's municipal code. Boulder City didn't make me do a CORA request. They seem to be more open about their policies than Longmont. And maybe the reason for this is Boulder has a genuine conflicts of interest policy, while Longmont does not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bowman. Appreciate your comments. Dallas, just to double check, we have no other callers, it appears.
That is correct.
Okay. So we will close the public comment And we will move on to item 5 on our agenda, which is approval of the August 18, 2021 minutes. And any discussion amongst the commissioners about the minutes? Commissioner Height?
I'd move to approve the minutes of the Planning and Zoning Commission for August 18, 2021, with one small caveat that with respect to the discussion on the first portion of the Rivertown, no, not the Rivertown annexation, the second part of our discussion, which was, excuse me, as I reach down and find it in the records. I apologize. It was with respect to the 1402 Kaufman Street conditional use site plan. Was that? It was with respect to the small coffee shop in the parking lot at 20th and Main Street. In any event, we moved to approve, but I think I had observed too that the issue with whether or not there could be walk-up customers, I think I observed that I suspected that medical professionals from the building adjacent to where this building was going to be constructed would probably be walking up. That was the only caveat I would add to those August minutes.
So Commissioner
moved
Height,
to-
just to be clear, do you want that added to the minutes?
I would like to have that. I would like to have that added.
Okay, so this is basically a conditioned approval of our minutes. That's on the floor. A motion to approve our minutes if there is a statement added that Commissioner Height made the comments that he just referred to. Do we have further discussion or a second? Commissioner Poland?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve and a second on the floor. All those, we need to do this person by person. I'll call the names of each commissioner. Commissioner Flegg, how do you vote?
I'm not able to hear you all clearly because I'm getting many feeds in on the sound.
So actually, Commissioner Teta, I know your mic is still on. Is that if we shut off your mic and Commissioner Oneron's mic, if we just go one at a time, it might help Commissioner Flegg. Commissioner Flegg, do you want to give your vote on the motion to approve the minutes? Commissioner Flegg? Is your sound working?
Commissioner Flegg, go ahead and try now.
I can still hear Commissioner Shernick. I abstain.
Okay, fair enough. Commissioner Oneron?
Yes.
Commissioner Teta?
Yes.
Commissioner Lukács?
Abstain.
Okay. Commissioner Height?
Aye.
Commissioner Poland?
Yay.
Okay, and I will vote yes as well. And so Jane, that is 5 yeses, 0 no's, and 2 abstentions from Commissioners Lukács and Flegg. So our minutes are approved with the condition. Commissioner Height, if Jane needs more clarity from you, I'm sure she will contact you to work out exactly what it is you said, or she can go back to the video of the meeting. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner, this
Yes.
is Susan. Looks like we just lost Commissioner Flegg.
Okay.
Would you give us a moment and allow her to log back in?
Sure. We'll take a brief pause.
Jane, is there a way to reach out to Commissioner Flegg? There she is.
Okay, yeah, here she comes.
Commissioner Flegg, give us just a minute. We're going to get your name corrected and permissions changed here.
All right, Commissioner Flegg, would you mind try unmuting your mic? Everything sound okay now?
Yeah, I'm only hearing one set of voices at a time.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will get back to our agenda. Good to have you back, Commissioner Flegg. Next on the agenda is item 6A, which is the Daniels Annexation Concept Plan Amendment. And believe we have planner Ava Parachevsky to walk us through it.
Thank you, Chair Shernick and Commissioners. Ava Pahajevsky, Principal Planner. Susan or Dallas, whenever you're ready, you can queue up the staff presentation. Thank you. Thank you. So this first item is an annexation concept plan called the Daniels Annexation. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to give you some background on this, and then the applicant will discuss their request further. As you can see from the red box here, this is the location. It's the southeast corner of State Highway 66 and Alpine Street. The total land area in the red box is about 8 acres, but the land area of this concept plan amendment is just under 2 acres. It is this area on the right and on the bottom, on the east and on the south, where you see the dirt. That's the subject, I guess, if you will, of this portion of the annexation agreement, annexation concept plan amendment. So this property was brought into the city in 2006, and at the time it was zoned residential PUD, and there was an accompanying concept plan, which I'll get to next. And it was rezoned in 2018 to residential mixed neighborhood when we did the very big overhaul of our land development code. And we rezoned many of the PUD properties to a straight zone. And so the RMN zoning allows many types of residential uses. It allows single family, it allows multifamily, duplex, triplex, including obviously paired homes. And so it matches, or it's consistent with the Envision Longmont Comprehensive Plan designation as mixed neighborhood. And so the allowable density range currently for this property is a minimum of 6 and a maximum of 8 dwelling units per acre. So for the total aggregate of this annexation, the allowable density would be between 48 and 144 dwelling units. And what's proposed here, and I'll get to that in the next slide, is 16 residential lots in this area where the dirt is on the east and on the south, plus 52 units that currently exist in the Village Co-op apartment building, as you see right there on the left side of the red box. And so there would be a total of 68 dwelling units. Next slide, please. And so currently, when the concept plan came in 2006, the proposal, if you see the hatched line there, that's the Village Co-op 52 unit apartment building. And then as you can see on the right side and on the bottom, or on the east side and the south side, there were to be 8 platted single family lots accompanying this co-op building. And in the concept plan, there would be a new local street, as you see here, this cul-de-sac that would be accessed from Alpine Street. Next slide, please. And so over time, as you've probably seen, the Village Co-op building was constructed. It's 52 units. It's right there on the southeast corner of Highway 66 and Alpine Street. What the current landowner of the remaining portion of the property would like to do is take those 8 lots that were platted already as 8 single-family lots and replat them into 16 lots for paired homes. And then the total density would be 68 units. And again, as a reminder from the previous slide, the zoning does allow up to 144. This is somewhat compatible with the development that's across the street to the west with the KB Homes paired homes development, in which they have 88 paired homes similar to this under construction currently. Next slide, please. And then just briefly in terms of public outreach, we had a neighborhood meeting back in January. Again, this was during the COVID restrictions, so we did it on a Zoom meeting. There were 22 attendees. Generally, the concerns were related to concerns from the neighbors from the adjacent single-family neighborhood in Pleasant Valley, increased density, adding 8 more homes, and what those traffic impacts might be. And then we sent out a notice of application when the formal application came into us in March. And again, sent out notice. We got 2 written objections for the same concerns, density and traffic. And the notes from the neighborhood meeting, as well as the comments from the notice of application, are located in attachment 3 of your packet. And finally, we did send out a notice of public hearing per municipal code and posted signs. I did get only one letter. It was an objection, and it was from one of the parties who also wrote in an objection back in March to the notice of application. And I believe that actually, I know I wrote here prior to packet being sent out, but I believe that I actually got that into your packets. So it should be there at the top or somewhere there. After the neighborhood meeting and the notice of application comments, it was one of the same parties. Next slide, please. And so that's just a brief overview of what was approved, what the zoning allows, and what they're proposing to do. Again, the reason we're here is because one of the review criteria, normally this would just have gone through a planning process, but one of the review criteria is that whatever they're proposing is consistent with any previously approved annexation concept plans. And since the original Daniel's annexation concept plan only showed 8 lots, we advised them you'd have to come back in and get a concept plan amendment. And then if that's approved by city council, ultimately, then they could come back and replat. Because they're planning more than 3 lots, this would come back to you as a preliminary plat as well in the future if this is approved. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Joel Siemens and Kim Voss, who are representing the property owner, and they will discuss the review criteria and the rationale behind the request.
Great, thank you, Ava. And before they start, we need Commissioner Height to make a few comments, please.
Thank you very much. Dealing with conflict of interest related disclosures. Joel Siemens, Rocky Ridge Civil Engineering, was retained by my law firm with respect to another land use project in a different jurisdiction. The work that I hired Mr. Siemens to perform was not used in connection with that project. My conclusion is I am not in any way, shape, or form biased by Mr. Siemens' work on this project, but I do want to make that disclosure. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Height. So yes, let's now move on to the applicant's presentation.
Great, thank you. So Joel and Ken, if you'd like to turn your camera and mic on, and Dallas, if you want to queue up the applicant's presentation, that'd be great.
All right, great. Thank you, Ava. Everybody hear me okay? Okay, let's trust that you are. Okay.
Yes,
we can hear you. Yes.
Okay, okay. Because all I see is my presentation. Okay, so hello, my name is Joel Siemens with Rocky Ridge Civil Engineering, 420 21st Street here in Longmont. And thank you for the time, Chairman Chernick and the commissioners. And with us, we have Matt Delich with who is our traffic engineer, and Ken Voss, who is a real estate consultant, and also Jim Morris, who's the applicant. Today, we're going to talk about the village duplexes, like Ava had introduced, is adjacent to the village co-op. Next slide. This is simply a vicinity map showing some of the streets and the location of those existing lots 2 through 9. Next slide. And because we're into maps, I wanted to add an aerial of how it stands today. The village co-op building is built, 52 units. Lots 2 through 9 are vacant. The detention pond is in place. Lily Court is also installed, awaiting final approval. Next slide. So the existing conditions, the total area of the Daniels annexation PD, taking out that right of way toward the north, the greenway is 6.64. I use this just for more conservative calculations. And so I'll get to that in a second. Lots 2 through 9 are being developed, and there are utility mains, street, sidewalk, and all drainage features are in place. Next slide. This is a copy of the platted lot, or sorry, the recorded plat on a record with Boulder County, showing the lots and the areas and the easements and the outlots as currently platted. Next slide. So my goal today is to go through the review criteria analysis to better explain the processes, and there are 6. First of all, to see what how it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, how it complies with city standards, is compatible with land use, layout, access. Number 4, it does not adversely affect the neighborhood. Number 5, complies with sustainability evaluation system and also includes a multimodal transportation plan. Next slide. The first one addresses the comprehensive plan, and these are some of the numbers that Ava crunched as well. Again, using 6.64 acres instead of 8 against the current zoning of residential mixed neighborhood resulted in a lower net of 39 to 119. Again, this is more conservative just to show, it just tightens the belt on that, so it shows a more conservative number. So taking out the 52 existing units of that area leaves for the co-op leaves 67 units available for development, and we are proposing 16 units. Next slide. So making sure that we're meeting and complying with city standards, Lily Court is adjacent to all the lots for access, pedestrian, vehicular, and emergency access. So there's adequate fire hydrant protection in the street. There's an 8-inch water main in the street, an 8-inch sanitary sewer main in the street, and there are drainage swales in the back of the lots and inlets in the street of Lily Court. Next slide. And this is north is to the right of the page. It's just showing some of the technical data if we have to reference later of the infrastructure that's been installed. Next slide. Item number 3, proposing development compatible with surrounding properties. Per Envision Longmont, I want to quote from the Envision Longmont, the mixed neighborhood plan goal is to provide residents with a mix of housing options and densities within close proximity to services and amenities, and also it'll serve as a transition between single family neighborhoods and higher density corridors, centers, and employment areas. similar to the duplexes being built to the west currently on the other side of Alpine. Next slide. Number 4, looking at how it affects surrounding properties. And so I wanted to focus on some of the the issues that were addressed during some of our outreach situations. Traffic, in short, we're proposing a lesser dense product. We're only proposing 16 units rather than a maximum that we already talked about. So according to our calculations, again, which are more conservative, is 51 less units than what's allowed for this area. There's a concern about off-street parking. And the following exhibit on the next page will show how parking is accomplished on the site. So if you go to the next slide, please. Whoops. Let me double click. So go back one, if you would. So you go back one more. There we go. That's one. So each shared driveway parks 4 cars or 2 per dwelling unit. And then each dwelling unit also parks 2 cars in the garage. There was a concern that they might borrow some of the spaces there at Village Co-op, but to assure there's plenty of parking both for the owner and for visitors to come visit. Next slide. Number 5 talks about complying with the sustainability evaluation system, making sure mitigate impacts of development within the city's riparian areas. And there are no environmentally sensitive areas here. There's a detention pond that's already built and approved in the southeast corner of the development. There are some drainage swales in their own outlot that won't be touched either. And so everything is in place and there's no need to, or no adjacent environmentally sensitive areas. Next slide. The last criteria addresses the appropriate transportation plan, showing multimodal transportation access. And so, as you can see on the next slide, if you would, there is a sidewalk circulation throughout the development. We use a darker line to help highlight the circulation. The walk connects to RTD stops as to the east, and also the walkway is adjacent to Greenway to the north, which was acquired by Village Co-op to install and is currently in use today. Next slide. So the proposed development satisfies all 6 review criteria of the municipal code put forward, and we thank for your time. We welcome any questions, and so we can address them to me, the civil engineer, or Matt, the traffic engineer, or Ken, or Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Siemens. Great. This is a public hearing item, and let's go ahead and open up the public hearing on this. So Dallas, if we could put the instructions up on the screen again for people to call in specifically to this item. The information is displayed on the screen for you folks viewing from home. Please call 1-888-788-0099. When prompted, enter the meeting ID 871-6287-3678. When we're ready to hear public comment, we will call on you to speak based on the last 3 digits of your phone number. Each speaker must state their name and address for the record and will be allowed 5 minutes to speak. Please remember to mute the live stream when you're called upon to speak. To do this, we need 5 minutes, so we will return at 7:45.
Yeah, so that's right.
Chair, I am going to drop the slide and let the live stream catch up. Right now, we only have one caller.
Thank you, Dallas.
It looks like our live stream is back. Shall I call on the first caller?
Yes, please.
Perfect. Number 958. Would you please unmute yourself? Caller 958. Caller with the last three numbers, 958. Are you there?
So now you're going to say.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, 958. We can hear you.
Okay. My name is Bob Vaughn. I live at 2435 Lily Court, which is the street in question, apartment 312. I had addressed the previous session looking to find some additional off-street parking, and I suggested hammerheads in the driveway. What I heard earlier tonight was that 2 cars per living unit was going to be adequate for these units. But yet at the same time, I take a walk in the evening and I go down Flagstaff Street in the block, which is immediately to the east of these, the west-facing lots. And I see half of the garage doors, when they're open, the garages are warehouses. There's no cars in there. The driveways will have anywhere from 2 to 4 cars in the driveway, and there's more than half of the street parking space on both sides used up. Now, those are single-family locations. If the density on them is doubled, I think we're going to have some problems there. And I do feel that although it sounds like this meets all the qualifications of density, like in actuality, if you look 1 block to the east, the actuality is that there's a hell of a lot more cars per building than what you folks indicate would be adequate. That's all I have to say right now. Does anybody have any immediate response for what I've said?
Well, Mr. Vaughn, we don't do a back and forth Q&A. And this is
All
your
right,
only
okay.
chance. Yeah.
That's
this is
what
your
I
only
have to
chance
say.
speak. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
comments. Really appreciate it.
All right. Good night.
All right. Dallas, any other callers that might have snuck in there? I don't see any.
Nope, we have no more callers.
Okay. So we will close the public hearing on this item and go to discussion and questions amongst the commission. Anybody want to kick us off? Commissioner Flagg.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't see anybody listed as being from traffic engineering this evening. And my question actually was in regards to if there had been any traffic studies for that area in Alpine, showing how much traffic is going through the neighborhood versus how much is being originated within the neighborhood areas. Do we have any of that kind of information?
Good evening, Commissioner Flake. Again, as I think I noted in the staff report that because when a project generates less than 500 daily trips per day, they're not required to submit one traffic study, so one wasn't submitted. However, I will say that Matt Delick is here, who's the traffic engineer for the property owner. So if Matt wants to jump on and if you have some data to share, that'd be great.
Okay, this is Matt Dallas, Dallas Associates. We're traffic consultants. Can everybody hear me okay? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Anyway, we did a traffic impact study back in 2017 for this same project when it was 8 units less than what it is now. And in that traffic study, and I'm going through here, this project generated on a daily basis about 254 trip ends. And let me define trip ends for those who aren't traffic geeks like myself. If you live at obviously you live at your house and you go to the grocery store, when you leave your house to go to the grocery store, that's one trip end. And when you return, that's another trip end. So a grocery trip is 2 trip ends. Just to define what a trip end is, because I'm going to use that terminology. So the previous proposal had 254 trip ends on a daily basis, 18 in the morning peak hour and 21 in the afternoon peak hour. And peak hours are defined as the time between 7 and 9 in the morning and 4 to 6 in the afternoon, the highest hour in each of those 2-hour brackets. Now we're adding 8 units to the single family aspect of this development, and it will jump the trip generation. On a daily basis, it goes to 330 trip ends, in the morning peak hour 23, and in the afternoon peak hour 29. So in the morning peak hour, the delta, the increase over the previous proposal is 5 trip ends, and in the afternoon peak hour, it's 8 trip ends. Those are single-digit increases. Now, in our analysis, in the traffic study we did back in 2017, bear with me when I page through this, we counted traffic at the intersection of the Ute Highway, Highway 66, and Alpine Street, and along the frontage of the property. Now, these counts were obtained in 2017, and we're in 2021 now, but we did traffic forecasts using conventional increases in traffic based on Longmont criteria. And in what might be termed the long-range future, and that is typically 20 years hence, and in this case, our long-range future in our traffic study was 2040. The increase in traffic over what will be on Alpine Street in the future was a 2% increase. So that's very small, 2% increase in traffic on Alpine Street, or what's going past this this street right now or in the future. So a 2% increase. So that's what we found. 2% increase is barely noticeable by most people. I'm available for questions. So shoot anything at me.
Yes, Commissioner Flake, follow on question.
The follow-up question I have, Matt, is, so do you know what the amount of traffic that just drives through that area is? And how, and my understanding is that it's just a 2% increase above that, which is already in existence. So
Correct.
by far, the most traffic that is on that street already is from not within the neighborhood area. Is that a correct statement?
What I gave the 2% is a 2% increase over our forecasted traffic. Recall that I mentioned we did the traffic study back in 2017. So we had traffic counts in 2017. And let me get to that page in this report. Bear with me here. So the traffic on Alpine Street and traffic engineers, well, daily traffic is an important element of traffic engineering. For analysis purposes, we use the peak hours because that's the highest hours of the day. So what I'm going to tell you is the afternoon peak hour, because that is in fact the highest hour of any given day. So on Alpine Street, the afternoon peak hour, and this is the north-south traffic on Alpine, not related to this development, was 136 vehicles. And we're adding 29. Now, that's the traffic now. The 2% I gave you earlier was our forecasted 2040 traffic, which is significantly higher than the 136 that I just told you. So, does that help you?
You're muted.
Yeah, my thought was that I was trying to find out if there's so much traffic on there now on that street, or at least in 2017 or whatever, so that yes, there'll be traffic coming and going from the development, but the amount that it will contribute is not great in comparison to what is already there driving through the neighborhood.
That's my conclusion also. Yes.
Thank
you. Okay. Commissioner Height, you had a question?
I did, thank you. Mr. Delick, in the meeting documentation prepared by Rocky Ridge of the neighborhood meetings, there was a reference, several references to a traffic memo to be conducted with the addition of, well, it's going from 8 to 16 units. Is that what your study that you're referring to right now, is that this additional traffic memo?
No, I did not prepare a memorandum for this meeting or for the project as you see it today. The study that I was referring to a minute ago was the study we did in 2017 for the 52 senior units and 8 single-family dwelling units.
Okay,
now
I appreciate that.
We're jumping the 8 to 16.
Gotcha. Mr. Siemens, if you're available, can you identify what you were referring to in your minute notes of this additional traffic memo? Is there an additional traffic memo beyond this analysis that's going to be prepared?
Yes, you can hear me, but I can't turn on my video, but that's fine. So eventually, as we submit with preliminary plat and final plat and the site plan and the PIP changes, that's when we bring all the raw data in and come back to this board specifically. When we do preliminary plat, we'll have Matt's revised memo. So right now we're just doing a concept plan amendment for the first step. And so we do the technical memos, verify drainage, traffic, utilities, and get in the nuts and bolts for the preliminary plat, and then do the PIP follow-up. So that's a time frame, but you will see that memo in the process.
Appreciate that. I have one more question for you, and maybe Joe, you're the right guy. Maybe somebody from Longmont can answer that. The intersection at Pace and 66, is that going to get signalized at some point in the future?
Matt, do you know that at all? I do not know.
Pace and 66.
Pace and 66 has a light.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Oh, it does have a light now? Okay.
Yeah.
I think I should know that, but thank you for
clarifying. I should know that too.
Finally, too, I think there was a comment in maybe referencing Joel's discussion that possibly traffic is going up, and I think it's 21st Street. I might be wrong, but moving in a east-west direction cutting around, I think at that point in time, possibly a lack of a signal at 66 in pace. Mr. Delick, is there any information that you have regarding traffic moving from possibly a more direct route out to Highway 66 and otherwise going through the neighborhoods east and west?
Well, right now, Pace and 66 are signalized, as we know.
Okay.
And however, this traffic from this development and others that kind of surround it come out to Alpine Street, which also comes up to Highway 66, approximately a half a mile to the west of Pace. Now, right now, a signal is not warranted at 66 and Alpine Street, and the signal warrants are based on volume. So the volumes aren't there to warrant a signal. In the future, in our study that we did back in 2017 and forecasted traffic out to the year 2040, we indicated that there's a fair possibility that the Alpine 66 intersection would be signalized in the future. But that would only occur if the volume warrants are met. As you well know, Highway 66 is a CDOT facility, and they won't allow a signal on their facility without it meeting the actual warrants in the manual on uniform traffic control devices.
But it's possible sometime in the future that might have to happen.
It may happen.
Okay. That's all the questioning I have regarding traffic, and I'll leave it to others. I have more questions, but on a different topic.
Any other questions? Commissioner Lukács.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I had the same concern as Commissioner Hyde with adding a light there at Alpine and 66. Do you know if in your traffic study you will include traffic going on 66 and turning into Alpine, or maybe going forward? Because, you know, if we add a traffic light, that means some that now are going through Pace then might be diverted through us. So will you include traffic from Highway 66 in your study?
Well, if in the future, when a signal warrant is done at that intersection at Alpine and 66, all the traffic going into and out of that intersection will be counted for well, every hour of the day, every 15 minutes of the day, for probably at least 2 days. And that information will go into conducting what's termed a signal warrant study. So short answer to your question, yes, all the traffic will be included in that work.
Okay, thank you. And I had some questions about the sidewalks. I think are they buffered sidewalks on Lily Street?
As in detached from the street?
Yes, detached. Yes.
Yes, they are.
So okay, so that means if there will be a wheelchair going on the sidewalk, they will not be slanted by the driveway that's right there. Right, it's a flat sidewalk, and then
Right.
the ramp is further in the detachment, right?
That's correct. So the driveway cut will come up, and then the sidewalk, and then the driveway will continue.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I think that's all for now for traffic. Thanks.
I saw somebody else had their hand up. I think it might have been Commissioner Poland. Yes.
Yeah, Joel, can you just talk a little bit about the way the driveways are set up? There was a couple concerns in the notes people wrote in about the shared drives, and can you just explain what you're doing, what you've looked into, and then what your opinion is for that?
There we go. So you bet. Is there a way I can get back one of the slides that shows the cars and the illustration in the presentation?
Yes. Which presentation?
The applicant's presentation.
Applicant's presentation. Yep. Give me just a moment. And which slide would you like me to go to?
So I don't have them numbered in front of me, but it's toward the back, and it's the only one that shows illustration of cars. So I think it's 5 from the back, or maybe 4 from the back.
All right, I will load it in just a moment.
That's the one. So Dallas, if you could zoom into one of those, we can see it in a little closer. Whoops. Maybe we just look at that. Or we could just look at that. I don't want to complicate things, but. Yeah, perfect. That'll do fine.
Does that work, or would you like? Is there a specific part you'd like me to focus on?
No, that's good. That's good detail. So again, this is concept plan. We think there's some efficiency putting the pavement together, that way maximizing the green spaces on either side. And so the intent is to design a driveway that's 40 feet wide, 20 on one lot, 20 on the other lot, with the lot line going right down the middle. And that would allow 20 feet for 2 cars in the driveway itself and 20 feet for the other drive. And so that's the intent of this concept plan. Again, we haven't done all the nuts and bolts, and we have 3 more steps to go through before this is approved. So there's a lot more work to do, but that is the current concept.
Joel, is there any kind of demarcation then in the middle to kind of like tell the neighbors where their lot line is on that driveway?
That's a good question. A lot of times they will pin the lots. So in the right of way, they'll have surveyors pins on the lot corners. So they'll have them in the back as well, but also in the right of way, all the way at every lot corner. So yes, it would be very visible, and they're about dollar size, so they're very noticeable.
And then it looks like there's 2 to 3 cars potential to park along the street between those between the driveways then?
Yeah, the only thing we have to watch out for is hydrants. There's 2 hydrants located. Of course, there's some area we can't park next to that, but yes, there's a lot of space in Lily Street or Lily Court as well to park.
Okay, thank you.
Dallas, can we drop? Yeah, great. Thank you. I have some questions for Ava, actually. Ava, hi. So Mr. Vaughn, who called in, he made some comments that I wanted to try to get some clarity on for all of us. So first off, when we're looking at projects, Mr. Vaughn is right that a lot of Americans use their garages as warehouses. That's beyond the purview of our commission. We can't change that. But when you're looking at a project, if the developer says this is going to be a house with 2-car garage, we have to assume that 2 cars could be parked there, right? And so if the developer is saying these are duplexes with 2-car garages and they can park 2 cars in their driveway, we're actually talking 4 cars per unit for this. Am I right about that?
Yes, Chair Shernick, that's correct. So the municipal code, we can only do what the municipal code allows. And if you can prove up in your drawings that you have a 2-car garage, meaning meeting the minimum dimensional standards, we would have to approve that. And so as long as their 2-car garages are at least 20 feet wide, approximately 18, 20 feet deep. And as you are saying, yes, that's correct. They would all have driveways and potentially could also have 2 cars parked in the driveway in addition to 2 cars in the garage. Moreover, there's also parking on both sides of Lily Court.
Okay, and I know we're at the concept stage, but does a project like this have parking minimums or parking maximums?
So in residential zones, we have parking minimums. For single family attached, this is what we would classify that as. The requirement is to have a minimum of 2 parking spaces per parcel. And so as long as they can demonstrate through a site plan review that they have 2 cars in a garage or in a driveway, that does meet our standards.
So right now, this concept is actually doubling our standard by having 4 potential car spaces per unit.
Correct. That's potential. And Mr. Vaughn is right. We certainly have a lot of residents who don't use their garages for parking. And unfortunately, that we cannot control. We can't
Right.
force someone to put a car in their garage.
Some people put TVs in their kitchen, and, can't control that either. Now there was something I didn't understand from Mr. Vaughn's comments, and I did see this in his letter as well. He was suggesting something about hammerhead driveways, and I didn't quite understand how that would work and what the benefit would be. And he said driveways, not a hammerhead into the cul-de-sac. Can you add anything to that?
I will defer to Joel on that because I wasn't at the neighborhood meeting. I can only imagine he's trying to say that people would park curved maybe, but I'll leave it to Joel because I'm just conjecturing.
Okay, great, thank you.
Abby, you have a correct conjecture. So instead of just going 40 feet straight rectangular, you'd come in at 20 and then go out and have wings probably all the way to either lot line. So you have one driveway, but actually the parking spaces are that way.
Oh.
And you can do a variety of different things, but what that does is it limits the landscape opportunity and it maximizes the runoff. And so we're not a big fan of that because it generates more stormwater to the pond. So we like a.
So Mr. Siemens, when you say it increases the runoff, that's because you would be paving more of the lot in order to create the hammerhead? Okay. Correct. Would you actually, it almost sounds as if you would lose the double stacking scenario, which you showed in that drawing, and you would actually park fewer cars, wouldn't you?
Depending, what we haven't done conceptually what that would look like, but you would need a 20-foot swing before the house and then 20 foot on that side to get 2 cars on each side. So we haven't laid that out to see if it would work for each one. Okay. I know as we lay out the duplexes, we need to offset them so they can't be all in a row. We need some depth and changes. So for some lots, it'll be harder than others because the house is going to be more in front or closer to the right of way. So there might be a challenge for those lots. So, but no, we haven't run those concepts yet on a hammerhead.
Okay, but back to one of your review criteria, which is that you need to meet our sustainability goals. Adding more paving would actually move you in the wrong direction from that, correct?
It would. I do know that in the as-built, the pond was oversized, so there is some capacity, but I just like to keep it at that as a safety factor. in case there's additional patio or whatever that's built in the back. You know, again, that's something that we can't control. Just like I like your comment about TVs in the kitchen, but yeah, it's just something we can't control.
Okay. One more question for you. Just to clarify, there was another letter in our packet from another member of the public who I think misunderstood exactly how many units are going in, but I just want to get this into the record. I think in the letter, the person said, "Oh, there's going to be 16 duplexes," and then they were counting that as 32 units.
Right.
So just for the record, we've got 8 lots that you're amending the concept plan to split those into 2. So there'd be 16 lots and 16 units.
Correct.
But 2 lots get 1 building that's called a duplex.
That is exactly right.
Okay. So we've really got 16 families, not 32 families.
Yeah, I think the confusion might have been that we might have called it 16 duplex units or 16 duplex lots, which it gets confusing because I totally see how she or he would jump to that conclusion. So, but yeah, it is 16 units total outside of the village co-op.
Great. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. It's like semi-annual and biannual.
Yeah.
Other questions? Commissioner Height.
Perfect. Joel, in our staff report, there was a reference that Public Works had noted that the public improvement plan needed to be amended because the sewer, water, and electricity was only sized for single-family residences. I think you had indicated in your presentation that all the sewer and water was appropriate. Is there anything that needs to be changed eventually?
The only thing that needs to be changed, the mains are okay as is. They just need to add services. So what that means is we need to do additional cuts into the street to make those connections. So each lot has their own sanitary and water, and they're not shared at all. So right now there's 8 pairs of utility sanitary water, and also the LPC is sized to generate electricity for all these units as well. But we would in the PIP amendment propose specific locations, so all the each lot will get its own sanitary and water service, but the mains are adequately sized. Yes.
Okay, so the service is adequate. It's just the number of connections needs to be
Correct.
stubbed
Yes.
in. Okay, thank you. That was it.
Commissioner Poland?
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to be for Ava or for Joel, but can you talk a little bit about the affordable housing, if there's going to be a component for that? I believe it was, there's a note in there, I think in the staff report about it. Can you speak regarding the affordable housing?
Well, it's a requirement, as you know, 12%. They can either deed restrict or they can do a cash in lieu. So I'll turn it over to Joel, or if Jim wants to do it on behalf of the developer. I don't know at this juncture what they're going to do with that. We would sort that out. Usually we do that through preliminary plat once we get through the concept plan stage. Joel or Ken or Jim?
Yeah, I was just talking to Ken. We haven't decided which way we're going to go, whether we're going to specifically designate lots or do something. Okay.
One comment to that, though, the previous concept plan, which had the 8 residential single-family detached permitted on these lots, did not include affordable housing. So by doing this subdivision, it does trigger the affordable housing requirement. The developer has no objection to that. It's really just a question as we get into what the costs and trade-offs are for doing the cash in lieu versus doing deed restrictions. That's certainly going to be accommodated. But that is one of the advantages of this in terms of the affordability housing goal, is that we do end up meeting that requirement where it's not, as it's currently entitled, required.
Great, thank you. Other questions, comments, discussion, motions? I almost called on you, Commissioner Teta. Okay, Commissioner Poland.
I'll give my 2 cents. I think, as talked about, the traffic increases somewhere maybe in the 2% range, kind of really minimal. We do get the benefit of some affordable housing, or at least a cash in lieu for that. I don't see a big issue with the parking. As you said, we can't control what people do with the garages, but there appears to be plenty of spaces that will be available for them. It's over what the minimum requirements are. And one of the things I know that we'd like to do is when we have something like an apartment building, we'd like to have a down step before you hit the single residential family. With the single residential family to the east, even though they are going to be up against a duplex, but it's basically almost like more of a buffer is how we look at it. So for me, this kind of checks most of the boxes. I'm okay with this, and I'll be for the amendment.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Poland. Other discussion, comments? Commissioner Height?
I can unmute myself. Yeah, I likewise believe that the applicant has demonstrated that it complies with the design review, with the review criteria to amend this concept plan. And I'd like to move for approval of PZR 2110. I'm sorry, PZR 2021-10A, finding that it meets all the conditions and approving the application.
Okay, we have a motion to approve PZR 2021-10A. Commissioner Poland?
I'll second that.
And that's been seconded by Commissioner Poland. Further discussion before we take a vote? Okay, let's take a vote. I'll do it by roll call. Commissioner Flegg?
Yes.
Commissioner Lukács?
Aye.
Commissioner Teta?
Aye.
Commissioner Oneron?
Aye.
Commissioner Poland?
Yay.
Commissioner Height?
Yay.
And I will also vote yes. So that does pass unanimously 7-0. And I need to find, there it is, my statement. This item will now be forwarded to the Longmont City Council for action. If you are unfamiliar with council procedures and intend to appear before council, please contact the Planning Division for further information at 303-651-8330. Mr. Siemens, Mr. Morris, and Mr. Voss and Mr. Dalek, thank you for coming tonight and presenting the project. Ava, thank you for stepping us through this and your help on it. We have more of an agenda to go through, so we're going to move forward. Next, thank you, everybody. Next on our agenda is item 7, which is secondary uses. This is a discussion amongst the commission and city staff about the concept of secondary uses and its application to projects in the city of Longmont. Is this Brian leading this, or Glenn? Are you kicking us off? Okay.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, yeah, I think this came up at our last Planning Commission, but it's come up a few times, the concept of secondary uses. And one thing I appreciate about our code is it's very flexible, and it's also very closely tied to our comprehensive plan. But that makes decisions a little bit or a little bit complicated. So thanks for this opportunity. And as you know, we didn't arrive here overnight. It's been an evolution. So in fact, I think about 20 years, this concept has been coming up. So we've got some of our best minds from our planning department here. I hope Brian made it, but we have Brian Schumacher, Ava, Don Burchett, and Aaron Fosdick, and they're going to kind of present kind of the evolution of how we got to where we are, and then also give you some examples, and then open it up for discussion. So that's my kickoff, and it's hopefully a bit of a free-flowing discussion. So if you have a burning question, go ahead and shoot it out, and we'll wrestle with it.
Great.
Thank you,
Who's gonna
Glenn.
start?
It'll be me. Thank you, Glenn. Dallas, could you start the slide presentation, please? Next slide. So tonight, planning commissioners, again, Don Burchett, planning division. I'm going to start this off, and then Ava, Brian, and Aaron will take it from here. Again, tonight, we're going to quickly go through some of these topics. I'm going to kick it off with a discussion about our previous code that we had, the original land development code, if you want to call it land development code 1.0. We're now on version 2. And then from there, we will talk about the Envision Longmont and the process that we went through, talk about our current land development code and some of the restrictions and how that works, and then get into some examples to show the commission how this has been working, and then open it up for discussion and direction if that's what the commission would like to do, or just have a conversation about the topic itself. So next slide. So I'm going to begin tonight talking about the past code restrictions. And to give everybody just a little bit of history, back in the 90s, we did a major update to the Longmont Area Comprehensive Plan. And as a result of that, and the changes in the policy and the land use map that was adopted at that time, we needed to update our land development code. And so in 2001, we actually created the land development code, I should say, which was a compilation of the existing subdivision regulations, the landscape regulations, and the zoning code that we had at that time. They were all in different areas of the municipal code, which was not very user-friendly. And we wanted to get this combined into one document where people could find the regulations and hopefully make it much more simpler for people to go through our process. As a result of the comprehensive plan and the changing of the land uses, we also had to adopt our new zoning map. So that was also adopted in 2001. One of the results of that was a consolidation of many zoning district types that we had in the community. We had a number of similar zoning districts that were very similar to each other, and we did a combination of those and reduced those down. One of the zoning districts that we ended up creating was the mixed industrial zoning district, and it was a transitional district, and it mostly covered areas that had been previously developed back in what I would say would be like the 50s, 60s, and even some of the 70s. Some of our older manufacturing areas, some commercial, some industrial areas in the town. And those were identified as areas where we wanted to see some change taking place. And as a result of the new zoning code, the land development code, what we ended up with was we were allowing and encouraging some development to occur that typically you would not have found in some of these manufacturing and industrial areas like housing. And we also then created the business light industrial zoning district, which was probably the major industrial development areas in the city of Longmont at that time. And that covered properties, for example, like the Amgen development, Xilinx, Seagate, and properties that were basically west of the old Twin Peaks Mall. And another change that occurred was that in that BLI, we allowed for some types of housing to occur as well. Mixed use was the focus, usually residential over some other kind of a commercial development. And that was also encouraged in the mixed industrial districts. What was also allowed during that time was the ability for what would be termed consumer goods and services. So if you think about how that area at the northeast corner of Hover and Ken Pratt or Highway 119 has developed, where you have some of the older business park in the back on the west side over by South Fordham Street, for example. And then as you came towards Hover, you saw uses that actually helped to serve some of those businesses, like restaurants to go to at lunchtime, some of the hotels for those people who were flying in from out of town that needed a place to stay while they were working there. Even daycares, places for people to take their kids that was close to work where they could drop them off on the way in. This was really, without us calling it secondary uses, kind of the kickoff of these secondary types of uses that we were allowing in these zoning districts. And at that original time, they weren't really limited other than just the uses themselves were specific in what was allowed. So let's go to the next slide. So as we started to see some of that development, specifically in the area that I talked about west of the old Twin Peaks Mall, what happened is that we were approached by the Longmont Area Economic Council, which is today known as the LEDP, the Longmont Economic Development Partnership Group. And they're really the group that was trying to look out for primary employment opportunities for the city, trying to attract businesses to the city. And what they noted was, as they were seeing the referrals from us for these development applications, some of the concern was expressed that, you know, we're starting to lose some of these areas that they were trying to save and protect for new primary businesses to come into the city. And so what we did is we talked to them about how could we still allow and encourage some of these other areas to redevelop, like in the mixed industrial area, and still allow some of these ancillary uses, some of these secondary uses to help service these business areas, but protect some of these subdivisions where they expected to see primary employment. And so what we looked at was started to look at limiting housing and the maximum percentage of the property that could be developed. We restricted the types of housing that was allowed. And then we also established limitations for those service uses that we talked about. Now, unfortunately, what we came up with was, I'll be honest with you, it was very convoluted. What it was based on is it was based on the subdivision. So we had to figure out what lot your subdivision was originally in, figure out how much area was in that subdivision, figure out how much of it was already built with principal uses of some kind of an industrial or business type of use, and then figure out a percentage of the square footage of that use that could then be used on another lot in that subdivision for commercial development. It was a nightmare for staff. It was a nightmare for the development community. There was no easy way to figure it out. And so we tried to look at that, knowing that we needed to provide these uses, we needed to protect some of these areas, but we also needed to make sure that, you know, we were trying to figure out a way that we could let this development happen and it could be something we can explain and something that we can help our customers to understand. And so when we started looking at, as Aaron and Brian will get into next, that was some of the reasoning why, when we were looking at these secondary uses, we were looking at how we had done it before and the troubles that we ran into in trying to figure that out and trying to figure out a better way. Is it perfect? It might not be, and that's why we're here today. But it's good for you to understand that this concept really kind of started back in about 2001 and has progressed up to today. And so with that, I'm going to let, I believe, Erin go to the next slide and let her kick us off on Envision Longmont.
Thanks, Don. Good evening, Planning and Zoning Commission. It's nice to see you. I'm Erin Fosdick, a principal planner. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on Envision Longmont because we've spent a lot of time on it, but we're essentially fast forwarding a decade plus from where Don just left off. And we think it is important to talk a little bit about the comprehensive plan because it does really set the stage and sort of provides that next iteration for providing the foundation for our code updates, which Brian will go into a lot more detail on. I know many of you were involved in the Envision Longmont Multimodal and Comprehensive Plan update. And so, we spent a lot of time talking about policies, talking about growth, and that's really where I want to focus tonight. So obviously the plan is made up of 4 different sections. We're not going to talk through those, but just important to remember that as we talk through this, particularly the policy framework and the growth framework, provide some good background and context as we think about the secondary use conversation. And so we're going to go there next. So Dallas, if I could get you to go to the next slide, we'll go ahead and start. Talking about the policy framework, you will recall that there's 6 guiding principles in the plan. When taken together, really aim to make Longmont more sustainable and more resilient. You saw that graphic on the previous slide. When we think about secondary uses, that kind of discussion comes up primarily in the first guiding principle, which is livable centers, corridors, and neighborhoods. It also comes up in the transportation system guiding principle. There's a few goals that really directly relate to secondary uses, and so I've pulled those here. I do want to mention that there are other goals and policies within the plan that sort of speak more indirectly, and if you have questions on those, we can talk through them. But what I really want to focus on are a couple goals that are in those 2 guiding principles I just mentioned. So first and foremost, probably the most related goal and policy language that we see in the plan is goal 1.2, and that's really centered on promoting a sustainable mix of uses. There are several policies under this goal that provide guidance specifically on secondary uses. So within this section of the plan suggests that we strive for a balanced mix of residential, employment, retail, commercial, recreational, and other uses that allow residents to live, work, play, learn, and conduct much of their daily business and increase self-sufficiency within the community. As you might recall, and we'll talk a little bit more about this plan was really focused more on infill and redevelopment as well as placemaking. Mixed uses are much more important and much more prevalent in this plan than they were in our previous Longmont Area Comprehensive Plan. Under this same goal, the plan also recommends supporting the incorporation of higher density housing types, particularly in centers, corridors, downtown, and mixed-use employment areas, where transit and a range of services, employment opportunities, and amenities are accessible not only today, but are also planned for the future. And then finally, the other policy that I have up here is encouraging the integration of complementary uses within the same building. Again, that vertical mixed use, or on the same site, horizontal mixed use, as a way of revitalizing centers, corridors, employment areas, again, improving access to services and amenities. So moving on to integrating land use and transportation. That was a big focus. Obviously, we integrated our land use and transportation plan with this most recent iteration of our comp plan, and this goal clearly articulates that. The policies that are most supportive here and most directly related to our discussion tonight are really those that relate to transit supportive and transit oriented development. The emphasis here is really on pedestrian and bicycle connectivity and the broader mix of land uses at higher densities and centers and corridors, again, to enhance community livability and expanding transportation options. And so you see the importance of, again, mixing uses, including secondary uses here. And as I mentioned, there's a few other places where this concept comes up, maybe a little bit more indirectly, but it is woven throughout the plan under the various guiding principles. As we shift to the growth framework, Dallas, I'll ask you to go to the next slide. So this is the 3rd section of the plan, and one that you are all intimately familiar with. The growth framework is a tool for helping the city, helping you all, city council, the community at large, anticipate, evaluate, and make decisions regarding location, intensity, and design for future development. And so for those of you that participated in our planning process, which I think was probably almost everyone with us tonight, you might recall that there was several different objectives that are really aimed at balancing our future growth and the need to protect character and quality of life. So these objectives that you see here are guiding our growth framework, and that's really promoting infill and redevelopment, creating places for people, expanding housing and employment options, promoting healthy, active lifestyles, as well as a healthy environment, and again, expanding multimodal options. So these are also really important for us, again, setting the stage for our later code updates and discussing the role of secondary uses in thinking about creating those active places that provide places for people to live, work, play, connect, and meet their daily needs. So the plan spends quite a bit of time talking about centers and corridors, and we saw that within the policy framework. And these centers and corridors are really envisioned as places where housing, employment, and transportation options are expanded and work together to create the places that we heard from the community are so important. Next slide, please, Dallas. So out of these objectives, and one major item that comes up and you see in the growth framework is this concept of centers and corridors. And this is a newer concept in Envision Longmont. It's not as prevalent in the previous comp plan, although many of these centers and corridors obviously existed. So you can see the major and minor corridors that were identified through the planning effort, and they're represented on the graphic here. These centers and corridors were really identified as an opportunity to better align land use and transportation objectives with those quality of life considerations by concentrating growth and reinvestment, making these really livable places, mixed use centers and corridors. You can see the descriptions. This is straight out of the plan. Again, these centers and corridors are really intended to support that mixed use development. And a lot of that is redevelopment and support a variety of uses and mixed use. I also want to point out, and you'll see this when we talk about the code, is that these centers and corridors, obviously this graphic is conceptual, but these really do correspond to land use designations on our future land use and transportation map, and then zoning districts on our zoning map, which again, we can talk more about in a second. I'll ask Dallas to go to the next slide. So obviously on the heels of adopting Envision Longmont, we set out to implement that plan. And one of our main implementation items was updating our land development code. Don talked about the big update that we did in 2001 that changed the way that we looked at things. This was another really big update. And again, you all are intimately familiar with this. You participated in this right alongside us and the community. But as a reminder, we identified a number of high-level goals at the onset of our code update project as well. First and foremost, we wanted to implement the recently adopted comp plan and other plans. So for example, the sustainability plan, the advanced Longmont plan, other supporting plans. We also wanted to create more opportunity for innovative quality development that aligned with this plan. And that included taking a look at current trends and best practices. Obviously, our previous code was, 15 years old at the time, and a lot had changed in terms of development and opportunities. And so this was a time for us to really reflect that. We heard throughout the comp plan process and then the subsequent code update process that we needed to really support development, redevelopment, and revitalization that encouraged mixed use and resulted in creative placemaking. One of the key pieces of that we heard and that we really tried to think about throughout the code update was flexibility. And so this was a pretty big theme throughout the entire update process. And I think you'll hear that when Brian talks more specifically about some of the code updates. And this is really important as we thought about as staff, ways that we could include things like secondary uses and not be so strict and bound like some of the issues that Don mentioned with our previous code. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk more specifically about the code update.
Hey, everybody. Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I was having a few audio issues. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'm Brian Schumacher with City Planning staff. And as Aaron mentioned and as noted, one of the overarching goals is to allow more flexibility and create more predictability as part of this code update to enhance opportunities for quality development in the community. And I know a lot of you on the commission sat through a number of meetings as we discussed the code update in 2017 and 2018. I think, as I recall, we had a total of 13 meetings with the commission on various topics related to the code update. So again, I appreciate all your efforts in the past and continued efforts on this topic. And specifically related to the topic this evening regarding secondary uses, I know both the commission and the council spent some time discussing this topic specifically and provided some general direction regarding secondary uses. So Dallas, if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. And so as part of the general direction that was discussed and provided by the commission and the council, as Don mentioned about some of the issues experienced under the prior code regarding tracking support uses and housing in the industrial zoning districts, we wanted to have that discussion with the commission and the council on whether it made sense to continue to track percentages of secondary uses in each of the zoning districts. And I think the general thought was that, no, it probably doesn't make sense. It's a hassle, and it creates a lot of issues and challenges for both staff and applicants. So as we were going through the update process, the general consensus from both the commission and the council was that it was preferred to create secondary use criteria and a review process rather than tracking those percentages. And so the commission and council also recommended that most of the secondary uses be allowed through an administrative review process, particularly in the mixed use zoning district. And that gets back to one of the update goals stated in the previous slide about creating flexibility and predictability with the code update. Although there were a few instances where the commission and the council thought that conditional use review of secondary uses was appropriate. And I think we heard from some of the commissioners at the time that they had some concerns about the introduction of small scale commercial uses in the residential zoning districts. And the intent of that was to, over time, try to create more walkable neighborhoods through the introduction of a mix of different types of uses in residential districts, while acknowledging that there potentially could be some compatibility issues with introducing those uses in some of the residential districts. So as part of that process, those were updated as in the code as conditional uses rather than permitted uses. And the intent was to have a review process that would include the commission's input to ensure compatibility of those uses. And one of the other secondary uses that was recommended to be a conditional use was some of the support uses in the primary employment district. And again, that gets back to ensuring adequate land availability regarding primary employment uses. Since the amount of primary employment zoning is somewhat limited in the community. Obviously, we want to just be adequate land availability for primary employment in the community. So next slide, please. So I think this was included in the council communication, commission communication. Just a brief definition. This is the definition for secondary uses. This definition describes a use not intended to be a primary predominant use in the zoning district. And I think it's fairly intuitive, but it specifically mentions the zoning district as opposed to basis. Next slide, please. And so I think this information was included as an attachment to the communication as well. And council recommendation to create secondary use criteria and review process. We added in secondary use criteria that were added to the code in addition to the review criteria that apply to all applications. So the first additional review criteria addresses compatibility of the secondary uses with surrounding uses. And that's kind of that example I gave where introducing smaller scale commercial uses in the residential district. We want to make sure that the location and the size and scale of those uses being introduced into a residential area are appropriate and compatible with the surrounding residential neighborhood. The second consistency with the envision plan and the intent of the land use code and the purpose of the underlying zoning district. And then the third additional criteria addresses that land availability within the zoning district, just to make sure that secondary uses aren't creating a situation where we don't have an adequate land supply for primary uses. Next slide, please. So these next few slides, and I think some of this information was included, I think in the communication, there was an attachment that showed the various secondary uses in all of the different zoning districts. This is just kind of a brief summary of that. This notes, the highlights some of the secondary uses allowed in residential districts, both permitted and conditional review. And most of these are secondary uses are allowed in the residential mixed neighborhood and the residential multifamily zoning districts. I don't think there's many, if any, secondary uses that are allowed in the residential single family district. I think the main intent was to introduce these secondary uses and allow them in a little bit higher density areas that may not have as much potential impact on some of the lower density residential neighborhoods. And as I mentioned before, obviously, some of these uses, such as the commercial uses, we wanted to introduce certain size and locational restrictions and criteria to, again, help with that compatibility with the surrounding residential areas. And just to note, I know that when we first introduced this concept of introducing smaller scale commercial uses in some of the residential districts, again, to try to over time create more pedestrian friendly neighborhoods. To date, we haven't had any requests yet from any of the applicants to propose any smaller scale commercial uses, but we're hoping that sometime in the not too distant future that we'll see some of that. And obviously, if it continues to be a conditional use, then the commission would have an opportunity to review those and weigh in on those proposals. Next slide, please. This slide just highlights some of the secondary uses allowed in the mixed use zoning districts, both permitted and conditional review. Although as noted previously and per direction from the commission and council, many of the secondary uses in the mixed use districts are allowed as permitted uses to allow for administrative review and more predictability, again, consistent with one of the goals of the code update. Next slide, please. And then this slide just highlights some of the secondary support uses allowed in the non-residential uses, particularly in the primary employment district that I mentioned before. And then again, there was a few instances where the commission and the council thought that conditional use review of secondary uses was appropriate, particularly in the primary employment district, just to ensure that there's adequate land availability for the primary employment uses. Again, this is somewhat related to the previous code and some of the information that Don provided regarding kind of the industrial districts that we had under the prior code. But the goal with not necessarily tracking percentages or square footages in a particular subdivision or a geographic area was to create a more user-friendly and flexible process in terms of these secondary use reviews under our current code. And that concludes my brief remarks, and I'm happy to respond to any questions after we wrap up the presentation. But with that, I think Ava is going to take over from here and go through a few examples where the secondary uses have been introduced in a few areas to date in our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Again, thank you, commissioners. Ava Pahajewski, principal planner. I've just got a couple of examples, if you will, of where we have zoning districts with different types of uses. And so this first slide is an example. This is the northwest corner of Highway 119 and County Line Road. You may be familiar with the UC Health Longs Peak Hospital there at the corner. That property is 25 acres, but this whole area in the red, not the orange, that's residential mixed neighborhood, but the parcels in the red are zoned mixed use regional center. The allowable primary uses in that zone include large format retail, restaurant, entertainment uses, those types of land uses that attract a regional audience, if you will. And then secondary uses of office, medical facilities, and high density apartments are allowed. And so we have this parcel here at the corner that's kind of owned halfway by UC Health and half by the Highlands Development Group. The total aggregate of the mixed use regional center zoning in this area in this zoning district is approximately 74 acres. Of that, 25 acres is hospital and an ambulatory care center along County Line Road that's under construction. 12 acres are going to be an apartment complex, as you see, sort of northwest of the hospital. And then there's a 3-acre piece just north of the hospital parcel that's going to be a memory care facility. That project is still under review. And so at the bottom of your screen here, there's, of course, the hospital. On your left is the apartments that I believe are under construction, if not in the final stages of review. And so that leaves several parcels still available for development. We haven't been contacted by anyone for development on them yet, but that would leave, 9 acres up on the north, 7 acres south of that, and then 13 acres and 5 acres over on the west of the hospital. So currently there are some secondary uses that are out there, but again, there is the potential for some primary users in the future. Next slide. And then the other example we wanted to show you is some good development is the Creekside neighborhood. That's along the south side of Pike Road, roughly between Hover and Sunset. This area is all zoned mixed use employment, as you'll see by the gray and orange hatch marks. And so those are meant to be employment related uses, such as, primary employers, manufacturing, processing, storage, office, flex, and that sort of thing. Secondary uses include hotels, civic cultural, apartments, and so forth. And so in the Creekside development, hold on one second, I have to, oh, there we go. Sorry, that slide was too big. So in the Creekside development, again, that area just west of Hover and east of Sunset on the south side of Pike is all zoned mixed use employment. It's approximately 73 acres in this zoning district, of which only 2 acres remains undeveloped. The remaining land seems to have been either under construction or was already built out. There's 37 acres of office, light industrial storage. Those all fall into the primary use category. Again, there's west of Sunset is a 9-acre office. East of Sunset is a 9-acre office. West of it is also light manufacturing office and so on. We do have 14.5 acres of high density residential and senior living. A little toward the west, as you'll see, there's the apartment complex and the Balfour Senior Home that is constructed on the east side of Hover. And then we do have, I believe it's a 19-acre mixed use project currently in plan review. And so again, this is a situation where we have 73 acres. The vast majority of it will be primary uses, but we do allow those secondary uses to provide some flexibility and, we've some residential units that would potentially be from employees who work in these offices and buildings. Next slide. And then I believe that wraps up our presentation. And all of us are available for questions. And if the commission would like to have a discussion at this point, we're happy to discuss and answer questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ava. Thank you, Don and Brian and Aaron. It's always great to learn from all of you. We definitely need the lessons. Dallas, can you? I for some reason do not have gallery view. Hang on, got to see everybody. Okay, sorry, my fault. I'd like to kick off with one question and then Commissioner Height, this might tie in, I think, with some of your concerns from our previous meeting. Ava, you gave us an example of the hospital area, and the total acreage was 70 acres, but 40 acres has already been developed as secondary use. And if I understand Commissioner Height's concerns at our previous meetings, it's that we're starting to give over more to secondary use than to primary use. Now, Commissioner Height, do you want to jump in on that and correct me if I'm misrepresenting your concerns?
Well, first of all, I want to thank staff very much for this presentation and taking the time to address what I kind of think are my issues, which is what is secondary. I appreciate Don's perspective on the history of looking at things at a subdivision level and how it's morphed into, excuse me for being blunt, we've changed subdivisions to zoning districts. You don't want to use percentages, but by default, you have to go back to percentages. In particular, in August and in July, we looked at two, and I'm really concerned about the mixed use districts, specifically MUE and MUR, primary employment, primary regional center activities. And if we could go, and I don't know if we can pull this up, but the zoning map for the UC hospital actually is within a zoning district that goes kitty corner across Ken Pratt Boulevard and County Line Road to the Walmart facility. And I don't know if you look at that as the entire district, but in a nutshell, that looks like it's maybe going primarily residential. Maybe not, but when new plans come into us, how are we to measure if somebody is proposing to do the entire corner of Ken Pratt, the southeast corner of Ken Pratt and County Line, if that's all going to go residential? And I kind of thought that there was a concept plan that showed that corner going residential. How do we evaluate whether or not it's no longer secondary? I appreciate that we want to be flexible, and I think the plan is flexible. And I think in the residential districts, we've created the opportunity for secondary uses of more employment or commercial related activities to take place on a smaller scale. But I'm looking at some of our bigger, and I think that's what, is it the Urban Development Partnership, LUDP, what they're concerned about is that the areas for primary employment, the areas for primary commercial activities are limited. The red areas on our zoning map, the brown crosshatched areas on our zoning map are limited. And for purposes of creating primary employment related activities, and we're allowing residential to creep in there to an extensive amount, in my opinion. We looked at something in August that was 90% residential, 10% commercial. That flips secondary on its head to me. But we were just looking at one lot within a zoning district. And I was told that, we'll look at it at the zoning district wide level. To me, we're punting down the road the percentage analysis to a later date and time by allowing some residential to creep into these issues or creep into these areas. That's my concern, Commissioner Sherman.
So let me just kind of jump back in on something. The hospital example that Ava showed us, so the primary use is regional center and for employment purposes, and we have in mind that the primary uses would be these large employers. And the hospital's not that. I mean, like, what a great employer, right? So, here we've got technically a secondary use, using up 25 acres, and then, and then you've got ancillary medical things like the ambulatory development and the memory care development next to it. And in my mind, that's a whole lot better than putting in a strip mall, which falls under the primary use. So, we can turn this into a counting problem, like Don was referring to, that in the past, they had to go by subdivision and count how many acres of this and how many items of that. I mean, that's a mathematical counting problem. But we could also look at it qualitatively in terms of, how good are the proposals? The hospital was a damn good proposal. Pardon my French, but
if I could interrupt.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the hospital, that's a primary employer in my mind. The apartment complex.
But it's not primary by definition.
I'm not so sure I agree with that, but maybe I could be educated. It is. Why is it not?
It's a secondary use, isn't it, Ava?
Yeah, I mean, I think technically it is. Obviously, it was identified as a secondary use in the Envision plan. It's identified as a secondary use in the land development code, because obviously we're trying to mirror the Envision plan. As the commission raises a good point, whether or not, we should consider obviously some potential changes. Things change over time, and the Envision planner dynamic documents, and can change over time as the community needs change. And one thing that's interesting about the hospital, obviously that was approved and constructed prior to the code update. So it was a secondary use before it was labeled as a secondary use in the code. So
my specific concerns are more related to residential creeping into these areas. So for instance, in the hospital plot, for lack of a better term, the 10-acre parcel to the north, if somebody comes in with an apartment complex proposal there, it's a secondary use. When do we say it's too much secondary? We got a 12-acre apartment complex already going in, have a memory care unit, which, in my mind, is a little bit of both, employment as well as residential. But it's the level of secondary use, and you bring up a good point, Commissioner Shernick. If a hospital is indeed a secondary use, well, have we blown it there and there's no longer any secondary uses to be permitted in that area? We need guidance, maybe a little bit, or we need to adopt some kind of guardrails as to how we're going to implement these secondary uses so they don't become the primary use in these areas where we want to encourage primary employment.
So Commissioner Unaron, I just want to pop one more thing and then we'll get to you. If the goal is to never have this turn into a counting problem, then there is the issue, and I think Commissioner Haidt just touched on this, of at what point do we stop permitting secondary uses? But many secondary uses are allowed by right, according to the chart, which was in our packet. And so do we actually have any sort of mechanism to say this district has achieved more than enough secondary uses and we need to stop now and wait for the primary uses to come in? But as Ava pointed out, there's been nobody proposing any primary use for the hospital district. Commissioner Oneron.
Thank you. This was a really good presentation, Don, Erin, Brian, and Eva. Really appreciate. I'm just going to make some conclusions and correct me if I'm wrong in these, because this is how I read your presentation. You see, we developed a zoning system in the 50s and 60s that really separated uses from each other. And now we're coming back and realizing that we need to mix more. And all the mixed-use zones you created, the employment zones, trying to really redo some of the things we did in the past. We created areas of single use, only commercial. The whole Howard corridor has a lot of commercial, nothing else. We created residential zones that have residential, nothing else. And we're realizing that it doesn't work really well. It doesn't create a lively neighborhood. It doesn't create uses that support each other. And it doesn't create not even a good commercial. It is car dependent and it's problematic. Now we're trying to, with the comp plan, come back and introduce some of the missing points. So my first assumption is that I see a lot of problems with the way the secondary use is defined in the code especially. Because from all your presentation, what I'm realizing that it's more like a conditional use. It's not ancillary to anything else. It's a use need to be reviewed. And if we say it is okay, it is the primary use. The only difference between the primary use and the way the comp plan wants to include the secondary use is that secondary use needs to be reviewed by us. And we need to decide if it is appropriate or not. That doesn't mean that it needs to be ancillary to anything else, because that's where the problem is. We all of a sudden say, wait a minute, you know, this is a regional center, it's all retail and office, and somebody comes with 100% residential, and we have a problem because it's called secondary use, as if it's an ancillary to anything else. But what you're really asking us is that if that particular use, 100% residential, appropriate in that particular context. So maybe code needs to be very clear about that so that we're not really troubled. And then the criteria is, of course, should be, does that particular use create a synergy or mutual support between other uses in that particular context? In most of the time, residential use does in regional retail or employment area because it's so much needed there. It creates, you know, 24/7 life, eyes on the street, and you create all those services away from the residential, and putting residential on top of that really provides good amenities, et cetera, so forth. That's all in the comprehensive plans. So the reverse is the same, you know, introducing some limited amount of non-residential into residential really creates a good neighborhood. So, you know, my gut feeling, you know, all these are assumptions, correct me if I'm wrong, but my gut feeling tells me that we need to change the way the secondary use is defined in the code, because that's very confusing. If my assumption is right, that is to say, secondary use in certain cases actually is the primary use, if we review and say appropriate, then it should be stated that way.
The only thing I would not necessarily correct, but maybe just clarify, Commissioner Honoran, is that not all secondary uses are conditional. So not all secondary uses would come to the commission. Some certainly do. And in those cases, you know, you all are the decision-making body. Some are administrative. I think you're right. And, you know, Brian and Ava touched on this in their presentation. We intentionally didn't include a numeric standard. But I think staff and obviously now the commission is sort of questioning what predominant and secondary mean in terms of numbers. And so we intentionally did not include a number. And you're right. In the example that Ava showed, it's possible that secondary uses when taken together could be primary in terms of land area or building area, but no one secondary use is predominant. But I think that is creating some discomfort for people. I think your other assertions around the comp plan and moving more towards mixed use and really creating these vibrant pedestrian oriented places that mix residential, non-residential employment. That's exactly true. And what the intent was, maybe we didn't get it exactly right. And to your point, could refine slightly, but some secondary uses are conditional, some are permitted. And so the review process is different depending on the use and the zoning district.
So to Commissioner Oneron's point, I mean, there's definitely, it's not just playing semantics with the words. I mean, maybe some of the wording could be changed. I know that there are standards within the planning community nationwide as to certain words like secondary, but I see the point that at a certain level, the hospital area being one, just the fact that we right here, right now, we're like, wait, hospital's primary. No, it's not, it's secondary. Wait, but it's a good secondary. So, and was it conditional? Was it, well, it came in front of us partly because of a height exception, which was conditional. But so the language perhaps is getting in our way a bit. That doesn't mean that the code's wrong, but maybe there could be better explanations of the language. Don?
Thank you, Chairman Chernak. I'd like to maybe go off of Commissioner Unrun's explanation in that I think he points out an interesting thing, which is that we do have a specific set of review criteria for secondary uses. There are 3 that are unique to those uses, whether staff is reviewing them or whether the commission is. And I think one of them specifically, it gets to the point that Commissioner Unrun talked about the ability for the commission or staff to make the decision that the zoning district itself, with the approval of a secondary use, could potentially basically lose the ability to meet its original intent or purpose. And so that I'm going to read that criteria to you. And it says, the secondary use as proposed will not substantially diminish the availability of land within the underlying zoning district for primary uses. So, Commissioner Height, to your point, at what point can we say no? It is when this criteria that's specific to making sure that the intent of that original, that if it's the last piece and there are no primary uses have been built, I think it's hard to argue that this criteria has been met. That you have gone past the tipping point. You have lost the ability to provide any commercial in a property, or if it was in the mixed use employment center, to provide an employment opportunity in this area, which again was supposed to work in concert with the retail, the other ancillary uses that are met in housing and things, so that, to the description of Commissioner Unrun's example of a mixed use community where I don't have to get in my car and drive to the restaurant. I can walk to work. I could walk down to a restaurant. I could take my kid down to the daycare. Those uses could all work together. But I think, to your point, there has to be a decision, and it's not a number. It is a criteria where the commission or staff is looking at a proposal and going, you can't meet this review criteria. You have just changed it to where there is no employment or there is no retail or there is no residential. At some point you're going to have to make a finding that you cannot meet that standard. And so that, in my mind, is what we weigh it against. And that allows then for flexibility for this group or our staff to really look at the whole picture and say, you know what, this medical here is okay because right now we still have a large chunk right next to Walmart on the other side of the street here, where you could do the commercial and provide those other ancillary services that, were primary for the zone, but ancillary to provide services to those other uses that are being built, like the apartments, like the employment center with the hospital. So that is my explanation of where does the tipping point come. It comes in this review criteria itself.
Thanks, Don. Commissioner Teta?
So I think one of the things I was worried about, and maybe Commissioner Height brought up and we had talked about, was if we allow a developer to do too much secondarily as a percentage, then what happens with the next parcel and the next development opportunity? Are they automatically refused their primary secondary mix because we don't have any left? How does that work?
Well, I would say I don't know that I have a clean answer for you on that, but let me give you an example of, if we look at that corner again where the hospital is. We've had that commercial area next to Walmart sitting out there for a long time, since before the recession. So probably 2003-ish would be my guess based on my memory. And it sat there. And I would have thought originally when that store went in, with the number of people that would go there, that we would have seen that area develop similar to what we saw up on 287 with the Walmart up on the north end of town. And it didn't. We have services out there. We have thousands of trips, more trips on Highway 119 than we do 287. And yet we were not getting anybody building any commercial out there. But now we have apartments going in, some residential homes in some area that's zoned residential. We have employers who are out there, have people that are out there 24 hours a day and need services. Now we're getting the developer who owns that piece coming in with their plan to develop that, because the rooftops are there and the people are there, and the people are there 24 hours a day and can support some of these other uses. And sometimes it takes other development contributing people and to be able to go and use those before the development community identifies and says, yeah, we can now build it. Oh, and we've also got 18,000 trips a day going by where people might come in there and actually get a coffee, or, I can't think of some of the other uses, but I would say that, yeah, you may not get apartments, but at some point with all those other uses, they're meant to serve the primary use. And so sometimes those primary uses may not come until some of those secondary have been there. And that's what I think we're seeing right now.
Commissioner Onaran?
Well, thank you for the explanation. I'm looking at that third condition, and when I read that, the Walmart site, we had this discussion. It was 100% residential. Yes, it's next to the Walmart. And, my gut feeling told me that that's the right thing to do there, apartment. But actually, when you read the line, we're actually rezoning that land. I mean, we're changing the zoning category from retail to complete residential. And the code is not really making it clear that we have that authority. We've made it. I voted for it because in the big picture, I thought it was the right thing to do. But really, I completely understand Height's objection. That is, the language doesn't give us that authority. When I read that third condition, it really tells us to do the otherwise. because again, it's secondary, and it tells me that, it doesn't give us a boundary within which we should consider this. And obviously, there are the primary uses, and this takes the land away from the primary uses and then puts apartments there, not retail. So that's why I'm saying that, the authority, our authority, should be clear in the code so that we're not really floundering,
So I guess I'd just like to respond. If the zoning code allows for the use, whether it's a primary use or a secondary use, you're not rezoning it. It is a use that is allowed under some condition as long as it meets the criteria that are in the code. And Brian, you might have to help me on this, but I believe the definition for I'm sorry, it's getting late. For the secondary boundary, I thought it talked about the district in the definition. Does somebody know what I'm talking about? I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought here.
Don, are you talking about just the definition for secondary use?
I think so. Doesn't it talk about and mention that you use the zoning district itself?
Right. It talks about
parcel.
not being the primary or predominant use in the underlying zoning district or the zoning district. Yeah.
Correct. And so it's again, it was never meant to be parcel specific. It was meant to look at the zoning district as a whole. So I understand what you're saying. It feels like it could be a rezoning, but again, if the use is allowed in the district, it's allowed, whether it's secondary or principal use. It's truly not a rezoning.
Commissioner Pullman?
Yeah, thank you. So Don, I think this gets to one of the things that I think that this is one of the issues that Commissioner Height had. And it's one of the things that we struggled with both, when we did the one over there by the Walmart, and then when we did this last one over off of, what was it, Sunset and Rogers, or wherever that was. It's not clear on what we use as a definition for the area we are to judge this against. So you brought up a good point. When you look at the regional center where the hospital is, I can think of that as being, it has to be north of 119, it has to be west of county line. But then you brought up the fact that the Walmart, which is the same zoning, but is that really the same district as the hospital? I mean, for us, I think that's where we have some of the confusion or some of the tension is the fact, where do we draw a boundary of what a district is? Where does it start? What do we consider? And to me, that's one thing that may not be very clear in the regulations.
And I totally agree with you. But I can tell you what we have looked at, and that gets back into Aaron's portion of the presentation, where we have those nodes, those centers, those activity areas that were shown on the comprehensive plan map. And I don't know if Dallas, if you could bring up the presentation, and I think it is on page, the next one, page 8. So we have these centers and corridors, and you can see out below Union Reservoir to the bottom left there, the large center that's identified, and that covers both that northwest corner where the hospital is and the southeast corner down where the Walmart site is. And so if you look at it from this standpoint of what is identified as a center, that whole zoning is for the regional commercial in that area is within that center. So even though we have other portions of it further north, up at Walmart North, for example, or out at the mall, this is one area that was identified on the comprehensive plan as a center, something that's meant to work together, that's meant to have, some kind of synergy. And so my look at it is this area is what we should focus on when we're looking at development in this area to see, have we exceeded, do we still have area available for that principal use? It doesn't mean that, to the commission's point, we shouldn't clarify, we shouldn't better define this to make sure that it is very clear, not only for yourself, but for staff and the developers, that we can do. But I hope we're understanding that, again, this is not an easy thing for us a little bit to explain, and which is kind of hard. But if you have ideas of ways to clarify and make this better, obviously, I think you're understanding at least what we're looking at when we're trying to give information to the development community on how they can develop and what limitations they face.
What I would suggest then is that when a presentation is being made, if this map or even maybe a subsection of it where you zoom in a little bit more, and you highlight the area that this is the total area that we're looking at for this development, and this is where we're judging it against. I think it's easy, as you said, if you're building, it's the last parcel and you don't have a lot of what you consider the primary use in it, yeah, that's a pretty easy call. Okay, yeah, we have too many houses. We do need to save some. We do need to save this for commercial. That's pretty easy when it's the last parcel. When it becomes really tough is when it's the first couple parcels that are going in and trying to understand the exact area that you're looking at. So that's what I would suggest is maybe including this in the presentation so we have a better idea of what we're looking at and what we're judging it against for the area.
Thank you.
Commissioner Height.
Commissioner Tedder hit it on that, not Tedder. Excuse me, Commissioner Poland hit it right on the head of what I was going to suggest, which is that when we're studying mixed use development proposals that have a secondary use component to it, that we probably should, as part of that review process, look at the entire zoning district that this project's going into. At the same time, thinking about that and reflecting back on Don Schett's discussion of how the subdivision analysis from 2001 got to be unwieldy, we are going to come to that same problem, I predict, because if we wait until the last parcel is going to be developed and say, sorry, folks, you can't put anything other than the primary use in there, it seems a little unfair and possibly is going to leave us with some orphan lots that people aren't going to be able to develop because it's too residential or we've allowed to become something other than what its primary use is supposed to be. And so I come back to my continual bitch over these last two projects that came up, which is that the proposal itself, I think, should be a mixed use proposal. It should have a secondary use as secondary. I want to look at them project by project, which is going to be how I continue to look at this for the time being. I understand, yes, at the district, we want to allow these secondary uses, but I don't know how to be fair about it to other developers that come later down the line without imposing the requirement upon every project that gets developed within the zoning district. I understand and truly appreciate that we're trying to be flexible, but we're going to flex ourselves into a problem, a big problem, unless we get in front of it now. And I think, as Michael proposed, we have to look at every one of these projects that come to us and looking at the entire district at the very least.
I'll just add in there that what you just said, Commissioner Height, also taps into what Commissioner Tedder was pointing out, that eventually the last developer in is left holding the short end of the stick somehow, or we are denying them development rights that we shouldn't deny them. And it's simply because of their timing. It's simply because of the sequence in which they approached us. Commissioner Onaran.
Well, I mean, providing a proportion is not gonna, in my opinion, solve much, because there are certain special circumstances where, let's say the zone is the regional center, and a lot of the regional center cases, we have predominantly commercial uses. Any developer who wants to come in there and fully provide 100% residential is doing something really good for the community. And that was the case with the Walmart. That was the right response to that particular context, because residential was really needed in that area. So requiring something like that makes their pro forma harder, and discourages introduction of that particular use. My understanding of that flexibility and all that argument is that we should make it easier if it's adding something that is needed, that is missing in that particular area. That's where the difficulty comes in. It would be much easier if we had 25% residential, 25% commercial, and 75% residential. So those kind of criteria are easy to follow, but it misses some opportunity. So that's why it's kind of, at the end of the day, it's a judgment we need to make. And, the shorter stick argument, well, it's the market. What market misses, the developers should follow that opportunity and fill it in. Our regulations and review process should enable that kind of flexibility. So, I'm going back and forth, but at the end of the day, my argument is that we should be able to have that authority to make the judgment. That is to say, in this particular case, in this particular location, this particular proposal is right or wrong. That's our function. That's our expertise. That's why we're here.
Commissioner Flake.
One of the things that I think that Commissioner Onaran referred to as market forces. We can't predict what the market will do. For example, when the UC Health Hospital went in, we didn't anticipate that it would be, in effect, employment, which is now going to be an employment center because of the office buildings it's putting in. So it's morphed from being sort of a secondary to almost being a primary use. And over time, things may do that anyway. So it is sort of an employment center. There is other retail, for example, south of 119 presently in that area. There are restaurants to the east beyond where Walmart and the park are. Now, that's not a real good walking distance from the apartments, but on a nice day, you might do that. I understand the restaurant there is quite good. So the other point is that one of the things that we looked at when we put the zoning code together based on Envision was that there were areas of stability that we needed to remember in the city of Longmont, that we want to make sure that we're not overwhelming an area when there are other kinds of uses that are pronounced in that area that people want to maintain for their quality of life. So yeah, I know it's a balancing act, but again, I get back, then I come all the way back around to the market forces. You can't determine that such and such will locate in an area. Like I always hear TODs referencing dry cleaners. I don't think I use dry cleaners on a regular basis. I imagine there are other people that don't as well. Other people use them all the time. So you can't determine that, voila, there's going to be these uses. It just doesn't always happen that way.
So we haven't solved anything, but Glenn, Don, does this help you kind of get some ideas going? I mean, does this?
I think so. I think the concept of it's really a continuum between art and science as far as how we make that decision, and it's probably leaning more towards art. So what we have to do for the commission is kind of build that story of why these uses are appropriate where they are. And you could say the same about quality versus quantity. Now, one of the things we did talk about is we do intend kind of in the middle of next year to bring the comp plan back up and make some revisions. And maybe we can strengthen some of those quality statements to further bolster your decisions of what land uses are appropriate. I know Commissioner Height's concern about the employment areas, and I know that's always kind of an area you don't want to lose. And we do have a land use that is primary employment that is very limited as far as secondary uses. So we still have those opportunities to land a corporate headquarters or a major manufacturer. And then when I kind of look at the land use plan, where those mixed use employment areas are, I think a lot of them probably had some existing industrial uses and then also neighborhoods. So I think part of it was how do you buffer those uses from what's around it? And that's what we wanted, that flexibility. But all I think I would add is, yeah, when we look at the comp plan, perhaps we can do a better job of kind of creating what those districts should be.
Okay. So, Commissioner Lukacs.
Thank you, Chairman Shernick. To what Glenn was saying just now, bringing more art into the presentations of new developments. Do we bring in? I know LEDP is involved in a lot of decisions, but maybe they can, in the future, bring some statements with these new developments, because I know that they research a lot on these regional centers. So maybe their opinion could, help us make an informed decision in the future.
Yeah, and I believe they actually are reviewers of anything that goes to the Planning Commission. Yeah, Don or somebody step in if I'm wrong, but I think we send everything through LEDP. Now, I do believe they would like to come to the Planning Commission and kind of present their economic development plan.
Yeah.
So you're aware of that, so we can schedule that at some point.
Yeah, that would be great.
Great, super. So I don't have anything brilliant to like summarize this with or anything, but it appears to me that this will be an ongoing discussion. It's probably going to be a discussion next year with council as well, right? Just watching the news as to how the city council race is going and some of the issues that have come up. I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron, Don, Glenn, Ava, and Brian, you're all talking to those folks next year too. So thank you so much. In interest of time for all of us and the folks at home, maybe we will move on with our agenda. And next item on the agenda is the final call for public invited to be heard. And Dallas, if we could put our instructions back up. So if you want to make any comments to the commission, now's the time to call 1-888-788-0099. When prompted, enter the meeting ID 871-6287-3678. When we're ready to hear public comment, we will call on you to speak based on the last 3 digits of your phone number. Each speaker must state their name and address for the record and will be allowed 5 minutes to speak. Please remember to mute the live stream when you are called upon to speak. We'll take a 5-minute break, which takes us up to 9:50 p.m., and we will return then.
Okay, Chairman, we have one person in the chat. We're going to wait a moment just for the stream to catch up with us.
Thank you, Dallas.
All right, our stream is back up and running. May I present our first caller?
Sure, let's go for it.
All right. Caller with the last 3 digits, 323 in your number. Would you please unmute yourself?
Hello, my name is Jamie Simo and I live at 1020 Venice Street. I was just calling to piggyback on Ruby Bowman's comment earlier during the meeting about a policy for dealing with conflicts of interest. I think it's really rather odd that Longmont doesn't have a policy in place to deal with conflicts of interest with regard to its commissions and boards. It really shouldn't be up to each commissioner or board member to decide whether or not they have a conflict of interest. And I ask that the creation of such a policy be prioritized for the immediate future. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Simo. Dallas, do we have anybody else?
That was our only caller.
Okay, we will close the public invited to be heard. And item 9 on the agenda is items from the commission. And Dallas, first off, I want to say congratulations. You've almost made it through your first major meeting like this. Great job, good work. And of course, Jane and Susan, thank you for everything you've been doing behind the scenes too. Do we have anything else from the commission? Oh, yes, actually, while we're in this, to the point by Ms. Simo and Ms. Bowman, Glenn, you've heard both of their comments. Can I ask you to do whatever it is the city would do in order to answer their questions for them?
Yeah, I certainly will. In fact, Jane has been working on that, and I think she has found said policy. So we will certainly get it out.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Anything else from any other commissioners? Okay, we will move on to our council representative is not here tonight. Glenn, any items from you?
Well, the only thing I was going to add was you have 1 week left of Community Planning Month, and you've certainly flexed your muscles tonight. So we certainly appreciate that as always. And thanks to Vice Chair Poland and Commissioner Lukács, who came out with the council and helped us celebrate that proclamation.
All right, great. Super. Again, thank you. Looks like Ava and Aaron and who else is still here? Boy, you're the diehards. Brian's still here too. Thank you again for all of your help in presentations and helping us understand these subjects and these issues. So with no further ado, the last item on our agenda is adjournment. Have a good night, everybody.